talk about the concept of protein. And that is because we hear so much about protein in the media, from our friends, and there is definitely some misinformation that is passed around about protein. So that's why I wanted to focus on it today and hopefully answer some questions you might have about it, give you a good idea what are excellent sources of protein, and we're even going to take a step, if you want to calculate your individual estimated protein needs. So that way you can have an understanding of what is necessary for you as an individual, okay? Because you and I are different, and the person sitting next to you is different. We're all different. So how do we help estimate that? I'll show you guys how to do that today, okay? So you have to bear with, let's see here, there we go. So some objectives for today, we're gonna talk about protein's role in our health. We're gonna have an understanding of why excessive protein could actually be harmful to our health, because that is a problem that I see very often, is excessive consumption of protein. And help identify your estimated individual protein needs and provide tips for meal planning to help make sure that you're meeting your needs. Sound good? All right, so I feel like a lot of people are pretty familiar with what protein's role is in our body, right? When you think of protein, what is the first thing you think about? Just shout it out.
Muscle.
Muscle, yep. Anything else? Is that the biggest thing, right? We think about protein, we think about muscle. The heart, absolutely. You know, our body has so much muscle, right? So it is important for not only building muscle, but maintaining and rebuilding muscle as well, okay? Maintaining muscle is very crucial to our health, to support our health in multiple ways. But it goes far beyond just muscle. It is the essential of our body structure and movement, plays a role in our bone health, but also plays a role in protecting our health. If you've heard of antibodies before, those are things that help keep us healthy. So if, let's say have you ever heard of the saying that you can never get the same cold twice, right? It's because your body builds antibodies to protect against that, okay? It can help aid in reactions like enzymes that helps like break down our food, right? We need those reactions to happen. Can help with our hormones, which are very crucial. Work as carriers, such as carrying oxygen all throughout our body. Cell maintenance and replacement, so help maintain the cells to be healthy. And of course, building new cells, which is what a lot of people mostly think about. And that building of new cells usually happens the most in infancy, adolescence, and pregnancy. We want the building of new cells to be happening as adults, but not too much, right? Okay, so there's a lot more to protein than just building muscle. We need it for a lot of other things too. And I think it's important to note that protein is important, but we hear a lot about protein, 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 right? Everything is protein. You walk down the grocery aisle and every cereal has added protein, or every oatmeal has added protein, or it's everywhere, right? Protein infused drinks. Have you guys seen waters and sports drinks that are infused with extra protein, right? It's everywhere. It's necessary to have protein, okay? I want to make that very clear. But research shows that most of us consume 70% more protein than we actually need. And this number is also goes toward vegetarians and vegans in the US. They also consume 70% more protein than is actually needed, okay? And some people might think, well, why would vegans and vegetarians be consuming that much? My hypothesis is that because they've been led to believe that they need to supplement more and more because they're vegetarian or vegan, that they do that, which is not the case, as I'll show you. Okay. Research actually shows that only 3% of Americans are deficient in protein. What do you think about that number? Does that shock you? Yeah, only 3%. And research shows that 3%, unfortunately, are usually individuals that are dealing with eating disorder issues. So simply if they were to eat enough calories, they would be meeting their protein needs. Where on the flip side, only 3% of Americans meet their fiber needs. So a lot of this country thinks that we have a protein deficiency, and many dietitians would argue that we have a fiber deficiency in this country, okay? And I believe we've talked about fiber before, but fiber goes far beyond just having healthy bowel movements, okay? That is part of it. If we want to talk about that in future sessions, I'm happy to talk about fiber more. Fiber is crucial for so many different things, okay? So, we need it, but we don't need as much as we need, or as we think we need, and where we get it from does matter, okay? All right, I wanted to talk about some of the risks of high protein, okay? I used to work at a gym while I was in school to be a dietitian, and a lot of people would come up to me and ask me questions about nutrition, right? And one of them was about protein, and this gentleman came up to me and said, yeah, well, they just told me that if I had too much protein, I would just pee it out in my urine. I want to tell you that if you have protein in your urine, that is a bad thing, okay? So we don't want that to happen. Excess protein is not a good thing, and here are a few reasons why. Research shows that high protein diets, especially those that are very high in animal-based proteins, increases calcium losses through our urine. So we know that calcium is very important for bone health, right? But the more high amounts of animal protein we consume, or protein itself, the higher amount of calcium losses that we have through our urine, increasing our risk for osteoporosis, okay? So we do need calcium and we do need protein, but getting it through different sources can be really helpful, such as dark leafy greens, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, okay? Also, many of you know that I'm very passionate about cancer as well as a cancer survivor and a cancer dietitian. Research suggests that lower protein diets may reduce the risk of cancer development. I want to emphasize the part that says lower protein diets, but they are still adequate protein diets, okay? They're just lower compared to the average American consumption. Is this better? Okay. So a 2014 study showed that adults between the ages of 50 and 65 years old who followed a high protein diet were 4 times as likely to die from cancer compared to those consuming lower amounts but adequate amounts of protein. The subjects also had a 75% greater risk of death overall. Is anybody ever talking about the risks of excessive protein? No, no one's talking about this. Does it come from the type of food that they're eating? It comes from the types of protein that they're consuming, particularly high amounts of animal protein. Like meat, like red meat, yep, exactly. And that's a very key one to be talking about because we know that increases the risk of colorectal cancers especially. Chicken is not as big of a culprit. Red meat and processed meats are much bigger culprits. So processed meats would be hot dogs, sausages, bacon, lunch meats, etc. These are posing a much bigger risk. All the good stuff, right? Yes, I know, right? Everything is better with bacon, right? Yeah. Say that again? Chocolate chip cookies, because you're eating one, right? Well, chocolate chips and cookies are not a great source of protein. They have a little bit in there, but it shouldn't be the foundation of your diet, but you can enjoy chocolate chip cookies, okay? I do too. All right, now this is one that's really, really important that a lot of people are definitely not talking about, and there's a lot of security, if you ask me, in dialysis clinics coming up, okay? Because when protein is consumed, what makes protein different than carbohydrates and fat is that it contains nitrogen. Nitrogen is actually a waste product by the body, and we have to get rid of it, okay? So nitrogen is released into the bloodstream or is digested and used, but it must be gotten rid of by the kidneys, okay? So if we're consuming high amounts of excessive protein over the long term, our risk for chronic kidney disease or kidney issues is much, much higher. So a lot of people will ask me, well, Allison, what if I ate too much protein in one day? That's not going to make a difference. But over the long term, we're going to see higher amounts of chronic kidney disease and so forth because the kidneys have to work so much harder to get rid of the waste. Okay? So again, it all comes back to adequate protein, not excessive protein. Okay? So are you guys people familiar with dialysis? Yeah, most are, right? It's often going 3 times a week, sitting in a chair for 3-5 hours, to recycle the blood. And what they're doing in dialysis is helping to remove waste that the kidneys no longer can do, right? So one of the things that we can do to protect our kidneys is to eat better sources of protein and not excessive amounts of protein, okay? So, yep, I am going to cover what types of protein, absolutely. And as you can imagine, the reason I'm bringing this up and addressing it is because we see so much excessive protein. If we're consuming 70% more protein than we need every day, over the long term, that is going to greatly impact our kidneys, okay? How do you know how much I have? It's all based on research and estimations, and we'll go through that today too. Okay, so what about protein and MS? This is always a big question too, right? And really when it comes to protein and MS, we also have to connect it to saturated fat. Okay, and the reason for that is because saturated fat, when individuals consume higher intakes of saturated fat, such as found in meat, milk, butter, and eggs, which are all high sources of protein as well, right, that are highly consumed in the American diet, we also see an association with a higher prevalence of MS. Okay, so we can't always isolate nutrients into one particular fat, protein, or carbohydrate, right? Because when we're consuming high amounts of saturated fat, oftentimes we're consuming high amounts of the animal-based proteins as well. Okay, and research shows that the reason for this higher association or this higher prevalence is related to cholesterol concentrations and also the conversion of fatty acids. Remember when we talked about omega-3s, EPA, and DHA and how important it is for patients with MS, right? The reason that this is tied, high amounts of saturated fat is potentially tied to that, is because when we have high consumption of saturated fat in the diet, we're unable to have an adequate conversion to these omega-3s. Right? So if we're doing all kinds of great things with chia seeds and so forth, but we're eating high amounts of saturated fat on the back end, that conversion might not be happening to lower the inflammation, what we're looking for. Is that making sense? Kind of coming full picture? All right, so then the next question is, how much protein do we need, right? Very good question, and it depends, okay? So these are the recommendations, and I'll help walk you through them. And the recommendations of protein and pretty much all nutrition things come based on kilograms of body weight. Okay, here in the US, obviously we use pounds, so I'll show you how to translate that very easily. But that's where the research is mostly conducted. Okay, so we have something called RDAs, or Recommended Dietary Allowances. These RDAs are meant to meet 98% of the population's needs, okay? And so sometimes there are situations where it won't meet someone's needs. Maybe potentially they have a chronic illness that they need higher amounts of protein for. Maybe they have some extreme wounds that they would need higher amounts of protein for. But generally speaking, the healthy adult, so they would need about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, okay? I'll show you how to do that equation. I have an example on the next slide. Also an older, healthy adult, and what does older mean? 65 years or older, okay? Protein needs do increase as we age, and calorie needs kind of decrease a little bit too. So that's where we're seeing that we need to have a little bit extra protein as we age to preserve that lean body mass that's so important to us. Okay, so the older adult, we're looking at a range of 1.0 to 1.2 grams. Pregnancy is also higher, but not really into the second and third trimester. Individuals that are going through cancer treatment, or actively have like chronic disease that's flaring, I would say, they're gonna have a range of 1.0 to 1.5. This is quite a big range, but this is where working with an individual professional can be helpful to assess their very individual needs. And then menopause. There's actually a lot more data that's coming out for women as they age, as they reach menopause, that their protein needs increase as well, again, to try to preserve that lean body mass. Because as we enter into menopause, we can lose some of that lean body mass, and how our body composition, or where we carry our fat, etc., can change. So we do have a little bit higher needs there. Just to give you some comparison, this is for the US, although the World Health Organization actually only recommends the healthy adult to have 0.7 grams per kilogram. So across the world, they're even actually recommending less protein, okay? You know, as a dietitian, I still go by the 0.8, but that's to give you a reference range as well. All right, so what does that look like? If you have your phones with you, go ahead and calculate this. If you don't, Dan's gonna be sending all of these slides next week in his email, so you'll have this equation that you can do at home to help yourself. So what you wanna do is you wanna take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2. That's how you get how many kilograms you weigh, okay? I kind of screwed this up a little bit on the bottom, but so for example, if you're 140 pounds, divided by 2.2, you're 63.6 kilograms. There's a writing mistake there. So it should be that you're 63.6 kilograms, but if you need 1.0 grams per day, then you need 63.6 grams of protein a day, okay? So if you have your weight in kilograms, then you want to multiply it by your protein estimation, which I have over here. These are the ones that I just talked about, right? An average healthy adult, 0.8. The older healthy adult, 1.0 to 1.2. Cancer to chronic disease, or menopause, right? So that way you can get an idea of what your estimation is. And again, this is an estimation. It can be plus or minus a little bit to make sure that you're meeting your needs, okay? Anybody do it? You don't have to tell me your number, yeah? Were you surprised that it was more than you thought, less than you thought, about the same? So to be honest, you wouldn't even really know, you didn't know. Yep, that's okay, that's all right. Did anybody else do it? Yeah? 106, did that feel fitting? Did that feel right? Were you surprised by that? It's more than you thought. Okay, yeah, that's all right. I would, well, depends on what your goals are. If it's improved health, I wouldn't recommend more steak. Just on average. I actually had a patient who had chronic kidney disease, and he wanted to work on better forms of protein to help improve his kidney status, but he didn't want to give up steak. And I said, I don't think you have to give up steak. But his goal and the way he did it was on the 15th of every month, he had a steak. That was his way of finding a balance where he would still get to enjoy steak while optimizing his diet outside of that. Okay, that might not be the same for everybody else, but that was what worked for him, right? Some people might not want to give it up completely. Some people might be like, what, just once a month? Maybe it's just a reduction of where you currently are, okay? Any questions on this equation at all? Yeah, Dan.
So does that kind of equate to kidney stones then also?
Yes, that's
so
like, yes.
Did it actually build up to kidney stones?
The higher amount of protein, when we see these excessive amount of proteins, we see a higher risk of kidney stones, yes. Because when protein comes from animal-based sources in an excessive amount or a high amount, rather than just like a small moderate amount, we see much more incidence of kidney stones because these types of proteins increase acid in the body, okay? I've worked with many people that have kidney stones, and when we were able to transition their diet to be more plant-based proteins and less animal-based proteins, we've been seeing a drastic reduction in their kidney stones, or none at all, after they change their diet. All right, so then you ask, well, what do we want this to look like? What do we want our plates to look like? Because Allison, you keep talking about eating more optimal forms of protein, okay? So based on not just today's presentation, but all the ones we've done in the past, what do we think might be better sources of protein to help meet our needs and reduce our risk of chronic disease and flare-ups of MS? Any thoughts? There's some on the screen right now. Yeah? Al? Less fatty meats. Absolutely. That is a great answer. Okay? Less fatty meats, leaner meat proteins. Okay? What about venison? It's a naturally lower fat product, lower in saturated fat. Especially for MS, the biggest thing we want to concentrate in is lower amounts of saturated fat, okay? So cheese, unfortunately, I know I'm speaking to fellow Wisconsinites, but cheese is the #1 source of saturated fat in the American diet, okay? So cheese is there is protein and fat in cheese, no carbohydrates, but almost 100% of the fat in cheese is saturated fat, okay? So I encourage people to think about cheese as a condiment or a flavor enhancer to their meal rather than the main focus, right? So if you want to have a little bit, like you want to have a quesadilla, do less cheese and load it with some vegetables, right? I'm not telling you to get rid of cheese completely, but I'm encouraging you to try to reduce it overall. Yeah? Good question. Is there a type of cheese that's better if you want to have it? Not necessarily between like cheddar or mozzarella, but you did mention like feta cheese or goat cheese. Like small amounts of that have been found to be a little bit better. And so I would encourage the same thing, just using it in small amounts. Because a lot of people really love like Parmesan cheese, right? But a little bit of Parmesan can go a long way for flavor. So I would encourage you to think about some that are going to make the most flavorful impact that you enjoy, or you can reduce it a little bit more. Okay? All right, so when we do meal planning or when we think about building our meals, I want you to think about this plate right here, okay? And I call this the plant-based, modified plant-based plate. And why I call it modified is because on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see legume, which is black beans, kidney beans, garbanzo beans, tofu, tempeh, or lean meat, turkey, or fish. Right? Like your meal should have that component of this very protein-rich food, okay? But what I need to also emphasize is that all whole foods have a source of protein, okay? Do you know that broccoli has more protein per calorie than steak does, actually? Right? You would need to eat a lot of broccoli to have the same amount of like 20 grams of protein that a small steak's gonna have. But by percentage of calories, there's a lot of protein in broccoli, okay? So a lot of people forget that protein is not just in the protein-rich foods that you think about, it's in all whole foods, even fruits. But I will say that fruits don't really count as a really great source of protein. Like a banana is gonna have 1 to 2 grams, right? Might not make a significant impact over the day, but all whole foods have protein in them, okay? Legumes are a really great source of protein. Things like black beans, kidney beans are also a really great source of what's called resistant starch, which is really powerful and impactful for having a healthy gut microbiome. Okay? Now, another quarter of your plate should look like whole grains or starchy vegetables. Okay? So whole grains are going to be brown rice, quinoa. You could put wild rice in that category. In terms of starchy vegetable, that's where your potato, your sweet potato, your butternut squash, that's where it would go. Yeah, Cal?
Allison, what's a whole food?
What's a whole food? What do you think a whole food is, Cal?
Fruit?
Fruit? Yeah. What else? What are other whole foods? What do I mean by whole foods? Not just the grocery store. Nothing processed, just regular food. So think about it as the food that is how it's grown in nature just as God intended it, right? And it doesn't mean never eat processed foods. If I stood up here and told you that I never eat processed foods, I'd be lying to your face, right? We live in a really fast culture. We live in a fast pace, right? There are times and places for processed foods. Technically speaking, bagged lettuce, bagged spinach is processed, right? It went through a processing of washing. There's a spectrum of processing, okay? You can have the bagged spinach over here that it hasn't altered the food itself, all the way over here to a Twinkie, right? This is an ultra processed food. It looks nothing like it occurred in nature, okay? So you have this spectrum. When you get closer to this side over here, where it's been minimally or not altered at all, that's a whole food. And that's where we see the greatest health benefits. The more whole foods that we can consume, the better health outcomes we have, okay? I'd also encourage you to think about how you feel when you eat certain foods. How do you feel when you eat an apple versus a Twinkie? Do you have a little bit of brain fog or sluggishness if you eat a Twinkie, right? Or if you eat an apple, do you feel a little bit more satisfied, right? There are things to think about. And I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we talk about not necessarily labeling food as healthy or unhealthy. We talk about what foods can do for us, right? And we talk about how they make us feel, okay? So, my daughter was talking about a cupcake at school yesterday, right? And she said, I think it kind of gave me a tummy ache. And I said, that's something to be aware of, right? And I want her to make her own decisions about how food makes her feel, right? And I can tell you one of my favorite foods growing up, one of the things I really loved was peanut butter M&Ms. Peanut butter M&Ms now make me really sick. They're not worth it. They don't make me feel good, okay? And that's a decision that I've made that they're just not worth it. I feel so much better when I eat other foods, okay? So the more whole foods, the better, okay? And you're gonna get way more nutrients out of it. Another example would be all-purpose flour. Have you ever looked at the ingredients of all-purpose flour? What does it say on it? Anybody know? Bleached, yeah, definitely, many of them are. It says wheat, and then after that, it says that it's been enriched with niacin, riboflavin, etc. These are vitamins and minerals that were taken away when they removed the wheat kernel, and by law, they have to put those nutrients back into the flour. Okay, that is a processed food. We're taking so much away from it that we have to add more back in so that we don't have deficiencies. Okay, whole wheat flour you go from the wheat berry to wheat flour to like all-purpose flour. It's kind of like a good, better, best, right? Like the best would be a wheat berry. How many of us have had real whole wheat berries? Probably not many, right? That's okay. But you're doing a lot better if you're doing whole wheat flour versus all-purpose flour because you still have more of the whole product. Therefore, you have more of the fiber, you have more protein, you have more B vitamins, etc. Okay? So think about your food the next time you put it on your plate. Like, what does this look like in nature? Does it still resemble nature on my plate, right? And then the recommendation is about half of your plate should be non-starchy vegetables. Kale, broccoli, carrots. What other non-starchy vegetables do you like? Starchy is like corn, sweet potatoes, all the ones my 6-year-old likes, but calls them, she's like, but they are a vegetable, Mom. They are a starchy vegetable. What are you gonna do to eat this side of the plate, right? Okay, I have some examples down here for you. And then I usually put fruit on the side. Can you hear me? There we go. Don't move. Mostly because fruit, you can add it to a meal, definitely. You can add it to a salad or something like that, but oftentimes it goes best on the side, right? Is this good for now? If it happens again, I'll take that one. And then on the side, I wrote extras, fats, right? Let's say you want to add a little drizzle of a dressing or a sauce, or you want to add some avocado. That's kind of how it fits in. Okay, keep in mind that not all of your meals are going to look perfectly like this. And so, for example, if you had chili, it's going to be all kind of mushed together, right? You're going to have your legumes with beans, or maybe you have a ground meat, and then maybe